Okay, then I come to the second part. So I think for me, you know, as a philosopher, I just really focus on this turning point of formulation, and maybe understanding this turning point in more detailed terms. One can use it on interdisciplinary scales in different ways. So I come to the second part, which is called meaning as responsive interaction. And I want to go back again to Dewey. To William James, with a quote that I want to read to you, because he started to notice the difficulty in describing points of explication, describing points of how we start to speak about something. And he realized there's a very special and very subtle kind of feeling from where we talk. And if we lose that feeling, we lost our point. You know that maybe in conversation, that all of a sudden, I don't know what to talk anymore. We didn't have it in words, but we had it as a very strange and slight feeling. And if the feeling comes back again, we can continue. And this feeling is something which has been overlooked for a very long time, because every kind of writing, every kind of creativity comes from this feeling. And trying to understand this feeling is a very, very powerful thing, because they really, body and mind connect. It's a kind of feeling from where we talk. It's a feeling from which words come, and inquiring into this feeling totally disturbs a dualism of body and mind. Totally disturbs. You must understand the body totally different in order to understand that this very subtle way of feeling things is a source for intricate meaning. And so James was the first one to put his finger on this subtle feeling. I read you the quote. Has the reader never asked himself what kind of a mental fact is his intention of saying a thing before he has said it? It is an entirely definite intention, distinct from all other intentions, an absolute distinct state of consciousness, yet how much of it consists of definite sensorial images, either of words or of things? Hardly anything. And now comes linger. And the words and things come into the mind. As the moment the words and things come into mind, this intention is not there anymore. It has therefore a nature of its own, of the most positive sort, and yet what can we say about it without using words that belong to the later mental facts that replace it? So trying to research that is very complicated, because you come into a kind of, turning. Stephen Deacon today is an anthropologist and neurologist, and he brings our attention to something very similar, which he calls the communication mood. He writes, "This has troubled psychology since its inception, the form of thought before it is put into words. We find it difficult, if not impossible, to gain introspective insight into the nature of a word before it is formed, or the idea that a sentence conveys before it is encoded into words. Remarkably, for all the difficulty we have describing this, it is probably fair to say that a good deal, if not most, of our mental life is lived in this not quite articulated, not quite formulated state." So it is very much due to the microphenomenological method that there have been new advances in describing this pre-conceptual experience. Yet the theoretical question re-arises: how do we get out of the vicious circle? How to describe this specific and subtle anticipatory intention that lets us speak in the first place? James started to describe how this anticipatory intention is not replaced by words, yet it shifts. Like if we start to say something, then this feeling shifts, and it lets us say new things. Or it doesn't shift, then we might have to say it again. If we have the feeling we didn't really quite say what we meant, we have to say it again. So he realized it's not just replaced, but it's a kind of dance between what we want to say and what we say. It's not just a replacement. And so words in relation to this definite intention, distinct from all other intentions, need not be regarded as a representation. It is rather some sort of experience, a fragile continuity of experiencing. So if you start to look at it like that, yeah, then wanting to say something and saying something is a continuous experience. It's not one thing is something inside and then comes the word. All of a sudden it becomes a continuous experience. If the continuity is disturbed, we grope for words. For instance, when we have the feeling we can't quite say it, then we have to do something. It's a strange feeling. If we have the feeling we're not understood, well, so there's some kind of disturbed continuity if we're not able to say, to formulate what we mean. If we succeed in putting something in words, it is a completion, a strange kind of satisfaction. And I think it's also interesting to understand the difficulty of learning a new language in this, with these kinds of approaches, because it is really as if an inner movement is constantly stopped. And and if you learn a little bit more and more of the language, you can say a little bit more and more, but you feel like, all the movement you can do, everything that is somehow impossible because you only have crude ways to develop it. That's quite an existential thing. That's, yeah. So, yes.
Doesn't that make it most important to learn and read a lot of humanities and explore your vocabulary and your ability with language as a very young person?
I'm not so sure if that's a precondition. Yes?
Or on the other hand, just being the state of mind of the language, which is much more beyond the verbal thing, but the whole existence that formulates itself into that language.
I would agree with you, because, and that's also what our methods show, that if you cultivate, if you cultivate being with this pre-verbal, if you cultivate this, it is enormously productive in bringing words, yeah? Even if it's just simple words. Yeah? You can be highly trained in the humanism and you can speak in ways that constantly disrupt this movement. That's for me a way of small talking. You can constantly, the philosophers and humanists, they can exchange theories, but it doesn't mean that it really, and this is now a genuine term, it doesn't really mean it carries forward a development of ideas. And I think for this development of ideas, it needs a different kind of relating to, attending to. The richness of like Deacon said, the communicative mood, or William James, the anticipatory attention, and Gendlin will call it the felt sense. The felt sense, and I will talk more about the felt sense in the afternoon. Yes. So, no, I'm sorry. It was a happy historical coincidence that the young philosopher Gendlin was involved in the first time research on psychotherapeutic progress, which was launched by Carl Rogers. After listening to thousands of recorded therapy sessions that Jenlin and his team found, that after listening to thousands of therapy sessions, what they found was a shock to the therapy world, because they realized that a successful outcome of therapy could be predicted from a surprisingly small number of short excerpts. In some studies, merely from 4 or 5 minute segments. The decisive factor turned out to be a surprisingly consistent presence or absence of the experiential mode of doing psychotherapy in any given case. So an experiential mode of doing therapy manifested in a kind of verbal or non-verbal reference to the ongoing experiential process while speaking. It was recognizable through pauses during the speech. These clients started to stutter. They did not continuously talk. They did not continuously narrate or analyze. So this research Jenlin was involved in. So he was a philosopher at the University of Chicago, and he was very much interested in this pragmatist concept of experience, and he was very frustrated about how the philosophers did it, because they again were just reading texts about experience. And he then heard that Carl Rogers, who was a psychotherapist at the University of Chicago, did something very revolutionary. He revolutionized psychotherapy in the 50s and 60s, because he began to understand that there were clients where the analytical way of doing things just didn't work. The analytical way of doing things was that the psychoanalyst really knew, was like the doctor. He understood the human psyche, and he could slowly understand where's the problem, and he wanted to get the person to also understand the problem. That's a very short way of saying. And the young Carl Rogers made the experience that there are some patients where it just didn't work. And there was especially one very stubborn woman who said, I know you think the problem is there, but it doesn't help me, and I will not, and just listen to me. And so at some point, Carl Rogers just dropped his know and he started to listen to this woman, and the more he listened, a movement started where the woman started to make sense to herself. And Jenlin was totally interested, because he realized there is somebody who really just lets experience talk with no interpretation, with no kind of frame what is important. He just lets experience talk. And as a young philosopher, he came to Carl Rogers and just made a kind of apprenticeship. And then after a while, he became the leading co-theorist with Rogers. And they made a big study. What really happens in psychotherapy? What really happens? Is it due to different approaches that one therapy school is more successful as the other? And they realized no, all psychotherapy schools are more or less similarly successful, but there are people in all schools who do development, and it is a matter of how they speak. And he realized, and he then started to develop the experiential, so it's a matter of how close are they to their experience. For these experiencing scales, Jenlin was awarded several times by the American Psychology Association. The turn in approach thereby initiated was to measure how the patients work in psychotherapy, not what they say. And then Jenlin, the philosopher, began to systematically conceptualize these findings in his philosophical work, Experiencing and the Creation of Meaning, and then also a process model. And this is a book we edited with his main articles saying what we mean, providing ways to think into the question, why is being in touch with experience in some way transformative? And what is the role of language, or what is the role of formulation in this? Jenlin makes us see that words as I said, are experiences in themselves, and preconceptual experience, or what he calls a felt sense, is not replaced, yet cultivatable through language. And so he kind of introduces new ways to speak about this relationship by suggesting, why don't we say that everything we say occurs into an experiential process, isn't about an experiential process, but occurs into an experiential process, kind of interacts with our experiential process. And if we regard it like that, if we regard it in this kind of occurring, then very new perspectives open up, because then we can say language occurs into our experiential process, formulations occur into, and what happens? What happens? Yeah? What happens with a felt situation when I draft it like this, or when I draft it like that? It becomes an interactional process. In his early work, he spells out a subtle interaction process of language and preconceptual experience working together to create meaning. So this is a bit technical now, but I think it's very worthwhile to go into it here now, as the use of language occurring into an implicit experiential process has the potential to carry it forward. So this is, yes?
I have a feeling, my own feeling, that this is getting into like sophisticated conceptualizing of terms.
Yes.
And maybe it's a moment to just let people say what they understood so far and maybe ask some questions.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah,
that's very good.
I feel like I'm
yes.
terms.
Yes. Yes, we could also say that we make maybe a short break or something like that.
Yeah, maybe we could do that. I mean, the idea of occurring into experience is so, for me, it's just like grasping. What does he mean by occurring into experiencing? It's a very heavily loaded concept.
No, for me it seems very normal. It's just an interaction that when you're not reporting on something, but the reporting itself is recreating or developing or enhancing the experience. And then you change all the time by what you say, what you perceive, and go on with the experience to in the next phase or stage.
I have two short comments. I'll say it briefly. The first one is, I think there's a little link missing in the methodology in what we're talking about, and the link I think is necessary is the aim of the conversation. I think, and it requires some sort of consciousness to come and say, okay, what is the purpose of this conversation? Because if I want to tell you something and I want you to understand it, I won't be open for the carrying it forward situation. So I think it's necessary between human beings to first conduct some sort of expectations decision, like we're deciding to carry it forward, and then we start it like some sort of like when you do sex, you want to enjoy it, I don't know, so some sort of an assessment that why are we having this conversation, because otherwise you won't have the willing to do that, and you would like to, as you say, document or say what you had to say, just so someone will understand. That's the first thing. And the second notion, I think, has something to do with mindfulness. I think I see a lot of connection to that, because and I wonder if you're going to say something about it later on. But that's different.
I'm talking about an intentional process versus unintentional process, which is different situations.
Yes, something like that.
I wonder how you define the meaning of language, actually. Is it just words or other things?
well, maybe first those two questions. Well, first of all, you are very right in this. If one makes a method out of it, yeah, one must say what one is doing. Yes, that's kind of that's when it's then it becomes a method, and that's what we try to create as a method. Yeah, we don't have it as a method yet. Yeah, but what I was doing in my research was just trying to find words and descriptions for the development which is then taking place. Yes. And the mindfulness thing is very true. Interestingly, this philosophy doesn't come from Eastern mindfulness traditions, but the microphenomenology does. Yeah. So there it comes. This philosophy comes more the roots that I have shown, and then also the great inspiration coming from psychotherapy, and in a way that's mindfulness happening in psychotherapy before one even had the term. It was in the 50s and 60s that one should, if I become more and more aware of how I experience things, the experience changes, and that of course is mindfulness. And the methods which Gendlin developed, thinking at the edge and focusing is often called as a Western kind of meditation. Yeah. So you're very right to point there. And then your question to the language, I think that is language can be everything. Language can be a dance, language can be a drawing, language can be a construction. Everything that formulates, yeah, and that's why I take the term formulation. Yeah, formulations. Yeah. Yes.
There's the common and known thought that you expressed before, that language actually limits our ability to either experience or research new ideas in our conversation, because we go back to what we know.
Yeah.
Now here you're saying supposedly a contradicting idea, and I want to ask if there's a way in this philosophy that is like a Möbius bottle. Okay? That sometimes the container is everything that's experiential. Mm-hmm. Language is poured into it as part of the experiences that we experience. And sometimes you change and you say, okay, language contains everything, and it's the container and contains experiences of thoughts, including what is now implicit in our conversation. And by being able sometimes to, this is the container, something that is the container, that's why I use the term Möbius bottle or Möbius ring, it doesn't matter. And you can live in this continuous uncertainty and be comfortable with it. We have to learn to be comfortable with uncertainty and still create knowledge within it.
Yes. And I very much like what you say there. Being uncomfortable with uncertainty, but I think that this also requires new way, it's difficult to be comfortable with uncertainty with the way we communicate and with the way we discuss in daily life, but also in academic contexts. It's very difficult. But it is possible, but it's not so easy. So I do think that being comfortable with uncertainty needs other conditions. We must allow more conditions that uncertainty can become fruitful. So that's what I think. Being comfortable with uncertainty implies a kind of cultural change, which requires different academic practices. We can have all other practices also, but some kind of spaces for cultivating areas of uncertainties for meanings to grow. Yeah. And your other thought is very interesting. We could go into it deeply. I think what was for me so inspiring, just to realize that experience is always already full, of course, you know, full of language, full of situations, full of that it's a continuum from very embodied experience to meaning. It's a total continuum, yeah. And that when we even read most abstract texts, they can make us deeply fulfilled and happy. And it's, you know, and it's philosophically very, very inspiring to understand meaning in these continuous terms. And that's the big philosophical challenge. Yeah. And then of course, you know, experience can be. I mean, it can be in texts, and texts can become again embodied experience, and from there, new texts can arrive. Yeah, the Möbius picture is nice at that point. Yes.
I did want to say something about the connection to design, because
Yes,
the embodied
please.
experience in design
Please.
is very much connected to doing
Yes.
and to the act of designing.
Yes.
And the idea that there is knowledge that can be accessed only through doing is very much existent in design
Yes.
practice. So
Yes.
starting from Donald Schoen and the reflective practitioner, but also very much in today's design thinking.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of methods that are used in design firms that are very quick and easy, like saying that in this session we don't use the word no, for example. We only say yes and. Or other kind of methods that are used as part of the creative process.
Yes.
And also the idea of reflecting on practice and reflecting in practice
Yes.
is
great.
part of the way designers create knowledge
Yeah.
and share knowledge also.
Yes. Yeah, I really do think that also philosophers have a lot to learn, you know, from designers. That this interdisciplinary the conversation is very, very helpful, because also the humanists or the philosophers are somehow stuck in old ideas, and I very often experience that, you know, what is cutting edge for philosophy is daily practice, yes, in the designing world. Yeah.
But on the other hand, just as was mentioned before, it's daily practice, but it isn't conceptualized very well.
Yeah.
So we know how to do it, but we have a very hard time talking about what we do. It's like this is what happens in the design studios, that you do it. You get into, you learn by doing, and now the exact sciences are discovering this concept of project. How do you call it? PBL, project-based learning. Yes. Project-based learning as a new thing in all the sciences, and in design, you know, this is the basic bread. This is what we've been doing all along, but we don't have much terminology and words to say what it is that we do.
I think it's a powerful tool for research by design, actually. Something about developing this kind of
What is a powerful tool? What we do here, yeah, what we talk about for sure.
design.
Yes, that's why I think it's so relevant to our profession and to the faculty to talk about this.
Yes, please.
I do find the connection between these ideas and the Cartesian methodology that we are in some point obliged to. And I think we are missing a lot as designers, only on the effort of trying to put our methodologies to integrate with this more traditional
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, and that's, I think, touches a basic motivation of mine, to really work on this ground level, that one changes a basic picture, you know, that one doesn't always have to, you know, pack incredible, intricate thinking and creative processes in very small concepts which somehow go along with some kind of Cartesian cut, you know, and I would, because also the ear, let's make 10 minutes break, then I would continue, and then we open up again. Let's do that? Yes? Okay, it should be embodied, so let's move a little bit, let's breathe, and
Okay.